Greetings, YouTube friends. Today is Sunday, February 15th, 2026, and I'm joined with my friend KM of the Weekly Stars, and we are here to discuss the Saturn-Neptune conjunction that is going to take place on February 20th, 2026, here in just a few days. Hi, KM. Welcome.
Thanks for having me again. I'm really excited to talk about this. It's a big event.
Yeah, our conversations are really juicy, and I'm enjoying them. So, so I'm looking forward to hearing your take on this. Um, I wrote a 2026 forecast book that is available through my Patreon if anyone's interested, and I did a whole section on the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, and the what I see as major themes that take place during Saturn-Neptune conjunctions are major restructurings, debt restructuring, cyclical, ideological restructuring, reshaping of beliefs, currency debasement, inflation, crises of ideology as well, empires collapsing, new systems being reborn. And specifically, what's interesting is that this conjunction is taking place at 0 degrees Aries. And what I notice when we get, I notice that there's an elemental breakdown of the conjunctions because they've been rotating between fire, air, and earth. And there are some themes that express themselves in the elemental nature of the conjunction. And this conjunction, being at 0 degrees Aries, is in a fire sign. And so the last time that we had a conjunction in a fire sign was actually in 1917. And interestingly enough, and sadly to report, that was during World War I.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then if you go back, I kind of rolled through a lot of them, and I'm not going to go through each one. But then eventually, if you go back far enough, you land on the last time we had a conjunction in the sign of Aries. And that one landed in 1703. And that was at 11 degrees Aries. And that was when we saw the Great Northern War, where Russia fought Sweden for control over the Baltic. And then we saw the War of the Spanish Succession also. And then another major theme that we see running through these conjunctions is the involvement of Russia in some sort of conflict or major shifts or restructuring on the world stage. So here we are, and making are walking our way through this conjunction at 0 degrees Aries. And I guess the thing that stands out to me cyclically as well is that Uranus is also transiting the sign of Gemini. And that also has a strong pattern to major conflicts in the history of the United States specifically. And so, it's interesting to think about with all of the conflict on the world stage at the moment, how that's all going to shake out. And so we could take a look at the actual chart, because I think the charts actually gives us a little bit of hope if we look at the chart of the current Saturn-Neptune conjunction.
Yeah. And I want to talk about that because Pluto being back in Aquarius is so different than Uranus and Gemini in the 40s and in the 1850s and 60s. But I wanted to also add some ideas for how to look at this synotic cycle. So Saturn and Neptune come together every 36 years. And one of the things I love that you pointed out in your forecast was this is an examination of what is real value. And that was such a potent way of putting it, because Saturn is about reality and Neptune is about dreams, about surreality, about the opposite, the metaphysics perhaps. And so the reason it's such an important cycle, we can measure all of this, as you know, of course, but all of the different planets and the way they come together over time. But I think the reason this one's so important as opposed to Saturn Uranus or Saturn Pluto is that this is a restructuring of reality with Neptune involved. And not to say that Saturn Pluto is not important. That was 2020, or Saturn Uranus. That's really important as well. But I think that we have been feeling this one, for much longer than prior ones. And so not only is this a 36-year restructuring of reality, but for people who don't know, Saturn and Neptune have been in the same sign since March 2023. Yeah. And that's an unusual part of this specific Saturn-Neptune conjunction, is that they're not just coming together in a sign and then parting ways over a 2.5 year period of time. They're going to be in the same sign from March 2023 to April 2028. It's a long restructuring. And you add that on top of the fact that they're coming together the exact point only once at the start of the entire zodiac, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. I think it's a really cool one to examine. And I would say let's pull up the chart and look at how this is presenting and some of the historical examples of Saturn Neptune conjunctions. And then we can get into the hope of it because I'm really hopeful about this one. And the chart itself shows us with that trine. So do you want to pull that up and we can
Yeah,
look at
let's do it. Let me screen share and here we
over
go.
New York, of course.
Over New York, yep. Home of the New York Stock Exchange. um, yeah, so there it sits in the 10th house over New York City. And, when I first pulled this chart, I was just immediately taken aback by the constructive nature of the geometry. Because when we look at astrology charts, we're looking at angles and different angles have different energies, right? So the trines, major and minor, because we have a major trine here, which is 120 degrees. And then we have two minor trines here that are 60 degrees. They actually just really represent to me free flowing energy. Energy moves quicker and with ease in this geometric shape. And then, when you look at squares, it's a little bit different. The energy tends to get a little bit more stuck. But we don't really right now, as far as like the aspects that are happening here to the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, we're really seeing a lot of ease. I don't know if I'd call it ease. We're seeing a lot of energy moving, right?
Yeah. It's a
Because
very momentum based signature.
yeah, absolutely. I think that's even like a rabbit hole that kind of, or maybe a misperception, I would even say, that some astrologers can get into, myself included at times, of thinking that a trine is necessarily positive. It's when it's really what it means is a lot of flow.
Yeah. And I always think about the fact that in engineering, the most stable or supportive structure is the triangle. And so supportive is a great way. And that doesn't mean that it's always good supportive. Bad people or bad intentions can be supported as well. But the reason I have so much hope for this is you can see right now that Saturn and Neptune are in a loose sextile with both Uranus and Pluto. And over the coming years, each of them is going to sextile. Saturn actually just ended its sextiles with Uranus, but Neptune's going to have a series with Pluto. It's going to have a series with Uranus. And on the day, on Friday, February 20th, they just happen to be coming together at the exact midpoint of Uranus, Pluto. So even though it's not an exact sextile and Uranus and Pluto don't trine each other until later this year, their midpoint, which means the exact degree between them, is 0 Aries as well. And that to me just is, again, a signature of how unique and powerful this Saturn-Neptune conjunction is.
I totally agree with you. Actually, what I named my 2026 forecast book and the theme that I identified for this whole year is ignition, activation, and expansion. And I feel like this event taking place it's the seed event of the year that is setting us up to really get an extreme amount of energy moving and to activate, where we're going for the next, 36 years in this cycle, but, acutely really just beginning this year, right?
Absolutely. And I think, it is a 36-year cycle, but the reason it's such an important one and more than just a 36-year reset is that it has not come together at 0 degrees Aries, the start of the whole tropical zodiac, since 4361 BCE. Can we talk about this real briefly?
Absolutely. I am so excited. Actually, I love that you thought of this. This is so good.
Well, it took a while for me to find this because the software I use doesn't go this far back, but we can look at the ephemeris that we have thousands and thousands of years past, and this is the most recent time that they came together. And 4361 is in the Neolithic era of humanity. what we consider the Stone Age, but also when writing began. And that is, to me, the huge takeaway of looking at the last time Saturn Neptune came together. You could argue that they have a 6,300 year synotic cycle at that point, or apparition cycle. I mean, that's not really technically correct, but since they haven't come together at this point since then, we can look and say, okay, well, what was happening then? If the invention of writing was happening then, and today, I think the biggest discussion outside of politics and global warming is large language models as the birth of some form of AI. We're once again perhaps reinventing writing. And I just I can't emphasize how huge that feels for the global reset. And it can be hard to take on because, okay, how do I hold in my single human body the energy of humans reinventing writing? It's almost too big to even wrap your mind around. But if it helps you feel better that this isn't just a normal 36-year reset like 1989 or 1953, but something bigger, and we won't necessarily just feel it this year, but it will play out over decades. I think that's a good way of understanding that this is a big time and justifying the big feels that we all have. Unless I'm alone there, but I don't think I am.
No, I don't think you are. I think that's a really brilliant take, and I love, the AI is such a powerful tool, right? It's also it has all of its, the fears that go along with it and the risks. But as a tool, it really has transformed our capacity to edit. And, of course, some people using it directly to write as well, or to help them organize their thoughts. But really, it allows us to communicate so much faster and articulate ourselves so much quicker. It's really quite profound.
Yeah, it is. And I think it's a great point to bring up in the context of understanding the Saturn Neptune conjunction and its implications. Because while it is a restructuring, an examination of what's real value, Neptune's influence as a foggy, confusing, sometimes deceptive influence or planet is signifies, and we can look back at this in history, a time of fantasy, deception, also hysteria in the public. And we can look back, one of the great examples from 1989, there was satanic panic. Do you remember that, Margot, in the late 80s? It was definitely a thing in the US.
That's fascinating. No, I actually don't think I know about that. So, but it sounds like
I
a
don't
perfect embodiment of Saturn Neptune.
Yeah, it is. It was something I was aware of. I was quite young, but I remember there was this fear that all these young kids were listening to satanic music influenced by satanic worshipers, and it was one of those cultural moments that reached a fever pitch around the conjunction and then faded from importance over time. It was at the end of Reagan administration, start of Bush one. And then you can look back, it's not just that example. 1953, we had McCarthyism in the US
Yeah.
and the Red Scare. 1917, the last time it happened in Aries, was the original Red Scare with the Bolshevik Revolution
Yeah.
and the beginning of communism in the 20th century. So today you can see that fear around AI, and you can see there's been really significant people stepping down. There's been Twitter threads that have millions of views about how it's going to happen so fast and take over. And I'm really enjoying using astrology to pump the brakes on that fear and say, okay, there might be some long-term concerns for AI. Absolutely.
Yeah.
We've seen the movies, we know where this could head,
Yeah.
but why don't we pause right now when we're in this peak moment of confusion and potential deception and hysteria and wait to evaluate the impact of it and say, okay, maybe some of these fears are unfounded because we know Neptune has such a powerful influence right now.
I think that's very eloquently said because, I'm one of the things that I'm really looking forward to as the conjunction completes and then they start to separate, which albeit slowly, as they'll be, co-present in the same sign for almost 3 years. But is feeling like we're moving out of that kind of Neptune and Pisces clouded illusion or delusion that can creep in, the shadow side, right? It's like we're moving into a much more direct and I like the word ignition almost, an ignited capacity to like step forward and to find truth, because Saturn really demands the truth. Saturn demands what's real. And so it is. I really do love the theme, what is real value? And for me, since I'm a financial astrologer primary, that pulled through in so many ways when I was looking at these past conjunctions too. I guess this is a good point to maybe segue just a little bit into some of the different events that took place during the, since you were talking about the hysteria that takes place, but there's also just this pattern of financial system restructuring that takes place during the Saturn-Neptune conjunctions. In 1989, we saw there was a big event. It was the credit crisis. That's what it was called. And that resulted in hold on, sorry, referencing my notes. It was the savings and loan crisis. Sorry. And that was basically 1/3 of all the savings and loan institutions failed during that time. And this institutional collapse unfolded alongside the peak unwinding of the 1980s junk bond bubble too. And so that was something that definitely affected the United States specifically. And the price action in the financial markets during that time was incredibly volatile.
Right.
So that's the 1989 event. Then back in 1953, you mentioned the McCarthyism and all of the that sort of hysteria, but we also had the London Debt Agreement. That was where it acknowledged that much of Germany's external debt was unrealizable, and writing it down restored stability and set the foundation of the German economic miracle, basically. And it was also Stalin's death. So
I know the
yeah.
Russian history examples. I mean, 1989 set in motion the end of USSR. 1953 was the death of Stalin. It was also the birth of Putin.
Yeah.
I don't know if we've talked about that. 1917 Bolshevik Revolution. You can just keep tracing it back to the foundation of modern Russia. It's really striking how much Russia's involved in that. I wanted to say, I believe we also talked about in the 50s, wasn't there a major moment for the British pound, which signified the start of the end of its global reserve currency status?
Yep. Hold on. I believe it was a Bretton Woods event. Hold on. Let me.
And while you're looking that up, I'll say, we know that there is challenges to the US dollar as the reserve currency right now. And looking back at the British pound, which was the prior world reserve currency before the US dollar, you can see how Saturn-Neptune conjunction correlates over a long period of time of that restructuring, or that loss of it being the reserve currency and the global restructuring. And it doesn't mean that it happens overnight, but it is an important inflection point.
Yeah, interestingly, Bretton Woods here took place. It was in 1944, but it was interestingly during the Saturn-Neptune square.
Right.
Right. So, again, another major restructuring event. And, you brought up the dollar, and I think I have the dollar chart prepped here. But what's notable is that the dollar has a 13-degree Aries sun. And so whenever we get this Saturn-Neptune conjunction transiting through the sign of Aries, once it gets about midway through that transit, and again, they'll be separating, so they'll hit one and then the other. But the US dollar has a whole stellium here: Sun 13 degrees, Mercury 19, and Saturn 20. So it'll not only be the Saturn return of the dollar when Saturn gets to 20 degrees Aries, but the dollar is just going to get hit over and over and over again. And so that really gives me a lot more confidence to say that I really think that there's going to be some major structural changes in our financial system. And, that shows up from multiple different angles, but it's definitely one of the themes that I see consistently when I've looked at all of these different events that took place there's oftentimes debt or financial system restructuring that's taking place during these events.
Yeah, and you know what happened in just because the pound was the most recent reserve currency and impacted that restructuring, 1953 was the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II, and and was tied to a big change in British economics, and the post-war boom and bust, and all of that had an impact on the pound, which in turn had an impact on global financial systems and structures like you're talking about. And I think that's really interesting. The British family is really closely tied with the eclipses, and we have an eclipse happening the same week as the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. Not that Britain is the global reserve currency anymore, but just fascinating to see that reflect over time.
It is, and this is a little bit tangential, but I have to point out how cool you just brought up the eclipse for a minute, and this is very tangential. But this date that you found of the last Saturn-Neptune conjunction at 0 degrees Aries happening on 3/3 at 3 a.m. and the
You
current
can't make it up.
you can't make it up, and the upcoming blood moon is taking place on March 3rd, 3/3. And I have to pull the time up, but it's just, yeah, that's pretty cool stuff. So very tangential.
Well, it's not though in a way, because the fact that the Saturn Neptune conjunction is happening in between two eclipses, which is such a significant, almost karmic or fateful time, because the lights in our solar system are cut out for a period of time. We have the nodes, which is the measuring of the lunar plane and the earth plane, slowing down, for this period of time. It's almost emphasizing how historic this is. And I'll just say, from a mundane perspective and even a psychological perspective, I've been looking forward to this day so much, because I think we'll feel a sense of relief. And
Yeah.
I wrote in my 2026 forecast that after this conjunction, there might be scary moments as we begin to rebuild or start to ignite the changes that we've been waiting for. But at least we'll be awake. At least we're not going to be stuck in this sleep paralysis and this sense of everything's changing, but we can't do anything. And I love that word ignition that you came up with, because that's very Aries. Aries starts everything. It's the first horse out the gate, all of those themes of running. And you said, about reality and how Saturn is tied to reality. Even though Saturn's in its fall in Aries, I think one of the things it really shares with Aries is a very reality-based sign.
Yeah.
With Pisces being the dream world, Aries is the real world. And that's another, I don't know, call me
No, I like
an
that.
over optimist, but I'm so excited for this event to happen so we can then move forward.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that moving forward is the epitome of Aries, right? So
Hmm.
I totally agree with you. And I think even though Saturn is in its fall in Aries, I think really what it speaks to is the need to be meticulous and crafted and goal oriented when you're
Yes.
moving forward, right? Saturn doesn't want unbridled, you know, barreling through things, right? Saturn doesn't reward that. Saturn rewards goal focused, detailed plans, so that's
Hmm.
been something that I've been focusing on and working with my clients on too, and specifically in the trading market, in the financial markets, is making sure you have a plan and that you're executing it according to your rules, because that's what Saturn rewards.
Hmm. I love that influence,
Yeah.
or
Um,
that idea.
Something else that I was going to mention about the Saturn Neptune conjunctions that really jumped out at me when I was doing my research for my forecast book is the 1882 event. And it took place, it was in an Earth sign, but the 1882 Saturn Neptune conjunction took place right before the electrification of New York. And one of my other big themes in the financial markets that I see, and this is from multiple different aspect patterns going on, but it's energy grid infrastructure. And so when this popped up, it was just kind of like light bulb. Wow. Yes, it was in Taurus. It was in an earth sign. So it made a lot of sense, right? And check it out. Also conjunct the sun, literally illuminating
Crazy. Yeah.
illuminating the world, right? But I think that this is a great example because it shows what sorts of completely like life changing for all of the cultures all over the world. A Saturn Neptune conjunction can do, right? It can
Hmm.
have a huge impact. Um,
Hmm.
and not just on the day that it happens, right?
Hmm.
The New York was lit up in September of the same year that this took place in May.
Hmm.
And obviously, building an electrical grid across New York took years. It didn't happen overnight, you know? So, but I also kind of loops me back to your AI topic
Hmm.
because
Absolutely.
the AI data centers are requiring so much energy, and we're seeing, you know, a need to expand the energy grid. So I also see this as a major area of investment and, you know, long-term development right now. So that's, if that's something that interests the viewers, you can check out my forecast book available on Patreon, where I go in more detail.
I love that that section of your book was so good because another way in which I think this sextile to Uranus and Pluto and they're trying to each other is going to manifest positively is that right now it seems scary how much AI consumes electricity and how that could be dangerous to the environment, water as well. But what if we use the Uranus Pluto trine to invent solutions, whether that's less toxic nuclear, whether that is eventually fusion energy, which they've
Mm-hmm.
started to possibly find a solution for.
Yep.
It gives me hope that the new electrification that we're going to go through, the new infrastructure changes to support AI, could ultimately be positive and help us evolve with the natural systems as opposed to against them.
Absolutely. And I mean, that takes me down a rabbit hole of, oh my gosh, that takes me
No,
down
I'm gonna tell you one thing I wanted to mention while we switch off ideas here.
yep.
Listen to the other three infrastructure changes that happened in the prior ones. So you mentioned the late 1800s.
Yep.
1917 was when roads started being built because that was when the Model T really took off. Model T came
Mm.
out in the early 1900s, but by 1917, cars were being proliferated in cities. Also, cars were so important to World War I, and that was ongoing at that time. 1953 was right before the US built the interstate highway system in the US,
Wow.
which was a major infrastructure project. And then my personal favorite one as a techie was 1989 was when the infrastructure of the internet became publicly available. And you saw Neptune blur the lines between humanity, and suddenly you didn't have to be in person to connect with other humans. It's such a Saturn Neptune conjunction that I think this time we're going to see AI and not only the physical infrastructure of it, like you mentioned with energy, but the way in which humans are going to connect, especially in this 200-year age of air. It's just such a great aspect of this synotic cycle that you found. I love the infrastructure aspect of it.
Yeah, that's really exceptional. Like just piecing all that together. I love how you put that together. And you know what it made me think of is one of the members of my Discord actually pointed this out, and he said he pointed out the 1845 top in before the railroad expansion in. And I thought that was really fascinating. And when I pulled up the chart, and I mean, this is really not this, I'm kind of going off on a tangent here, but
I
look at
love
how
it.
close Saturn and Neptune were here
Yeah.
in 1845, you know, as we were approaching that 18, what is it? 1882
Yeah.
conjunction?
There was one right before then in the late 1840s.
1840s. Yeah, there was another one in between them. I just don't have the chart pulled up. So anyway, very fascinating stuff that we see all of this, you know, and I mean, it actually makes me curious to look at like self-driving cars charts, because
Absolutely.
that's something that I've been looking at from a different angle, actually. Um, I've been kind of in a rabbit hole of doing robotics research as well, based on some asteroids with another friend of mine. But and that's where self-driving cars came up. But actually, now thinking about it through this context, you know,
The
that's
infrastructure.
yeah,
Yeah.
the infrastructure for self-driving cars. And then you can also, I mean, you know, outer space is another huge hot topic right now, and you know, curious to think about. And then, of course, we wouldn't be doing justice to the Saturn Neptune conjunction if we didn't touch on disclosure.
Right. Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
You know, Dan Waits did an awesome video on that, really going through the correlation to, events about aliens in the news media, whether they're true or not, but correlated specifically to the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. And then what happens this weekend, nonchalantly, you get Obama in an interview who says, oh yeah, aliens are real. I haven't seen
Hmm.
them, but they're real.
I saw that. That's funny. I just saw that. Plus,
Yeah.
and this is a great example of how this specific Saturn-Neptune conjunction's interacting with the outer planets. You have Uranus, which deals with innovation and technology, about to enter the sign of Gemini, which is about transportation. So you'll see that with self-driving cars. SpaceX has put out this idea of intra-Earth spaceship that would
Yep.
get you from, Paris to LA in 30 minutes or something crazy like that. And then Pluto in Aquarius is often tied to revelations about aliens and not just extraterrestrial idea, but the impact of foreign cultures, people, situations in each time that it's at in Aquarius every 248 years. So it's all interconnecting, and that just goes to show how this trine sextile setup, which I've adopted the term the Aries vortex, is just so powerful. It's going to change things. And I'd love to go through some astro mapping, unless there was
Oh
any other
yeah,
charts that
I
you
would
wanted to
love it
do
if you would
to
do
show how
that.
this all connects.
No, I would love to see your astro
Okay,
mapping.
great.
It just brings it all together.
We've been having fun doing this on our new moon videos, and I think it's just as applicable here. Can you see the map?
I can. Yep.
Okay, great. So I have, of course, we're in the US. I'm always biased. I'll do some panning over, but you can immediately see this is where, on the exact moment on Friday that Saturn Neptune conjoin, that the planets and the sun and moon are going to be on different angles. So immediately in my eye, I'm pulled to this Mars through, kind of the eastern seaboard. It's not as close to DC as the eclipse is, but pretty fascinating to see that, go straight through there. And it is the culminating line, or the MC line. But then you have the sun, which is a positive, bright, optimistic influence, or at least an illuminating one, also on the eastern seaboard, closer to New England. But I'm really fascinated when we talk about energy and energy infrastructure to see the North Node, Sun, and Venus all in a close orb around Venezuela. Isn't that fascinating?
That is, I mean, the astro mapping is brilliant. It really drives
It's
home.
incredible.
I feel like it takes all of the analysis that's a little bit like heady for some people. It's like it puts
Yeah.
it right there and you just can't make it up, you know?
And we can see where there's going to be hot spots if Saturn Neptune conjunctions, especially in Aries, deal with conflict. We can see, okay, look, this one right here, which is the rising or AC line, is going straight through Alaska. So that could have something to do with Russia as well, but all the way down in Antarctica, which tends to be a
Mm.
global influence. We see over here, this is the MC line. No, yeah, the MC line is going through Brazil, but also Greenland. So you can see these two lines are close because Saturn, Neptune are conjunct on that day. And then guess where the other one is? This is the DC partnership descendant line straight through Russia and the Middle East, you
Wow.
know?
Yeah, and
And
Brazil has elections this year too, I think.
right.
So that's interesting that when you said Brazil, that jumped out at me.
And they're part of the BRICS country, which is
Hmm.
an organization of China, Russia, Brazil, other countries that are trying to create a different currency that, among other things, than the
Mm.
US dollar to trade in internationally. So I found that influence fascinating for that reason. And then the other one, I don't know if you guys can see it here, but down here, this is the IC line goes straight through Antarctica. So again, a global influence that we would expect with the 0 degrees conjunction point.
Hmm.
I find Uranus through Western Europe, Germany, Italy fascinating. There could be some unexpected changes there. I also noticed in the US, once again, we have Pluto straight through the US, actually on the border of Minneapolis. This is the MC line. And on the eclipse video that we did, we talked about how Pluto was going through the country on a different line. It wasn't the MC, but that there might be some way in which the US needs to evolve to not be literally split in half. And to see that come up with the Saturn-Neptune conjunction was fascinating to me as well.
Wow.
I don't love the Chiron line going through the west coast of the US
Yeah.
because that could be something that is physically, this is the AC line. So it could be something physically like an earthquake, but it could also be that something about the Silicon Valley and the West Coast, tech is all based on the West Coast from Seattle down to Los Angeles. And there could be something about the way in which that presents with the world having a big reset or restructuring on the Saturn Neptune conjunction.
Isn't that a Jupiter line crossing just off the coast of Mexico down there? Crossing
Let's
Chiron.
see.
Jupiter crossing
Yes.
Chiron.
So this is a Jupiter IC line. So that does give me hope that there could be something beneficial for the land, the home that goes through Southern California, Nevada, Baja. Now, on the other hand, it could expand that Chiron influence, which it intersects with. Let me add in the Perrin line, which is where they intersect. So that goes straight through Mexico, Western Africa, Saudi Arabia, India. Look, see how you can track it all the way through,
That's
which
very
is
cool.
very cool and also a little nerve wracking. Oh,
Yeah.
here's the other Saturn Neptune. Look at
Got
that.
you.
Goes straight through Japan, Eastern China, and up into Eastern Russia. That's the IC line. If I misspoke earlier, there's a line that goes straight through Antarctica too, but that's really fascinating to me.
Yeah, that
Was there any other part that you wanted to look at?
the only thing I was curious about, and I just remembered, I actually had intended to talk about this closer to the beginning of the video, but that we have on the day before the Saturn Neptune conjunction on the 19th, we have the moon joining Saturn and Neptune. And so I just wonder if that is something, it would be curious to see where that lands on the astro-cartography map as well. Um,
Yeah, we could look at when the moon conjoins each of the planets. It'll be a few minutes differently.
yep.
But I think even better would be to look at the lunar lines on this map. Even though it will have separated, it's still going to be in Aries when the conjunction happens, right?
Mm-hmm.
And and so the ice or the AC or rising moon goes through the Pacific, which is interesting. And again, Alaska and Western Canada. We have another lunar line that is the MC line straight through Greenland and off the coast of Brazil, kind of just reinforcing the lines of Saturn Neptune itself. We have this other lunar line, which is the DC line going straight through the Middle East, Iran. So that's where we could see something very significant happen there. Iran, the modern chart of it from the 70s has a lot of Aries influence, including an Aries sun.
It
And
does,
so
yeah.
we can expect that this Saturn Neptune conjunction will trigger or call into influence that, and we're already seeing that there was massive protest worldwide this weekend about the current Iran governance regime. But look at how the lunar line, I don't know if you can see this, it's the brown dotted line, goes straight through the heart of Russia. So
Huh.
very important to bring up that lunar line. I think because it's going to make two different connections with Saturn and Neptune back to back. I
Yep.
don't know if it's helpful to look at those two charts, but I could pull that up too.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to, the exact time is February 19th at 3:48 p.m. is when it makes its first connection to Saturn. But I don't know if it would be that different enough to really look at that. Um, Interestingly, too, I mean, the Saturn Neptune conjunction is also happening on the south node of the New York Stock Exchange as well.
Yeah, that was an important point to bring up.
Yeah,
And
that's
fascinating. So this is when the moon conjoins Saturn on the 19th. So right before previewing that,
yep.
that's pretty intense to see
Oh, I'm
Chiron
not
and,
seeing your
oh,
screen
okay.
anymore. Yep,
Thank you. I forgot to reshare again.
there we go.
Are we seeing it again?
Yep, now I see it. Yep. Oh yeah, look,
So
it's
this
going
is
right through
again
Texas. That's interesting. Yeah.
Jupiter, but also, this is still a day before the Saturn Neptune conjunction. To me, that just screams oil again,
Yeah.
but also pretty close to that El Paso point that had a big impact in the news with the air control, the airspace being shut down. But yeah, Chiron and Pluto intersecting over South Carolina. Pretty fascinating.
Yep.
I'd love to pull up the New York chart and just look at what you had put there for the exact conjunction. Kind of, I thought that you had some interesting thoughts on how that could play out with New
Yeah.
York and potentially
Yeah.
markets in that way.
So here's the moon Saturn Neptune conjunction over New York City at 3:48 p.m. on the 19th. And it's interestingly in the 8th house over New York City, and home of the New York Stock Exchange. So the 8th house is also getting activated by you know what? I think I don't have, hold on. I have a
I
lot
can
of
pull up the
charts
chart
of
too.
that. Well, I have the New York Stock Exchange, but what I don't have pulled up that is I'll just talk about it. So is the I have too many charts. This is classic Saturn Neptune confusion happening right now in
hmm
front of your eyes, everyone. Where did I put that one I just had?
It's like a massive Mercury retrograde. And this is actually an important
Yeah.
point when we talk about the ignition and the reset, all of which I'm really excited about. I've also been telling my Patreons, my clients, I've been saying, make sure that you have patience because 5 days after we're going to go into a Mercury retrograde
I
in the sign of
know.
its detriment and fall, which is another signal. Don't despair, don't panic, but it does mean that there's some more sorting out and confusion that could be happening afterward. But my positive reframe again, always trying to think of an optimistic, is that we could use that Mercury retrograde to review what comes up in the next couple of weeks
Yeah.
and really get clear before we launch into that ignition energy of Saturn, Neptune, and Aries.
It is. It's almost like Mercury is kind of like pulling us back just a little bit to like
Yeah.
before you launch into this new ignition,
hmm
right? It's like, let's review, let's think about
hmm
Mercury, right? Let's think about, uh, all the things that we've learned from this Pisces transit.
Absolutely. Yep.
Um, but yeah, so I found the chart again. So here we are. We're in the 8th house over New York City. And what I'm thinking of is the eclipse chart over New York City. And, I can actually just pull that up real quick and share it with everybody. But what's interesting is if you put the eclipse over top of the New York Stock Exchange chart, it's also falling in the 8th house within 5 degrees of Pluto. And so the 8th house is really about, well, from a financial astrology perspective, you get debt, taxes, leveraged instruments, other people's money. But from just a more mundane perspective that also weaves into financial astrology is transformation, right? I
hmm
mean, that's the epitome of a Pluto in the 8th, right? It's
Yeah.
plumbing the depths. And so then when I noticed that we have this moon conjunct Saturn Neptune over the 8th over New York City, um, it really gave me kind of like little goosebumps. I was like, "Ooh." And we know that Saturn Neptune conjunctions or cycles are correlated to currency restructuring, and financial system restructuring. So also crises, that's entirely possible. We won't rule it out. Here's the New York Stock Exchange. This is the eclipse chart falling in the 8th house over New York or over the New York Stock Exchange. And so then last but not least, if we take the Saturn Neptune conjunction, this is the conjunction itself, not the moon, but it's going to be in similar placement here because the moon will just be here also at 0 degrees of Aries. But it's hitting the south node on the New York Stock Exchange chart. And it's not too far off from the midheaven being at 23 degrees Pisces. But really, that south node is interesting to me because that's old patterns, and getting the ignition point sitting on old patterns, that's another. It speaks more to transformation and restructuring. And then on top of the
Yep.
fact, you get this happening in the 9th house or over the New York Stock Exchange 9th house. And so then, of course, we could bridge into the idea that like we have we're supposed to have the tariff decision on Friday, exactly on the date of the Saturn Neptune conjunction,
I know you can't make it up.
directly impacting international trade. 9th house rules international trade and partnerships in financial astrology. So, Yeah, you can't make it up. It's fascinating. That's like I feel like that's my catchphrase for all of astrology. It's
I
so
know we always say that together.
I
It's really
know.
fun.
It
Can I tell you, I
yeah.
love all this, and that the international trade component is fascinating. The thing that I keep repeating, partially just to convince myself, but also to help other people understand it, is that one of the confusing aspects of Saturn Neptune is that it is inherently a paradox. It indicates long-term change that happens all at once. And then I always keep going back. There's this Hemingway quote where he says, "How did you go bankrupt?" And he said, "Gradually and then all at once." And you can apply that you can apply that to bankruptcies, to change, to revolutions. And I think there's something where, okay, yes, are we resetting the way humans communicate because of that 6,300-year cycle? Yes. Will that happen overnight? No. But you should understand that there's a paradox where some things will happen overnight.
Yeah.
We're still seeing the impact of the last Saturn Neptune conjunction and the way that the internet has changed humanity. But some things did happen overnight. Within 2 days of that conjunction, the Berlin Wall was torn down
Yeah.
overnight, something that had been in place for decades. So we could see leaders, institutions, things overnight. And the other way I interpret that South Node is that things could be released into the public. There could be
Mm.
revelations, especially with the eclipse signifying revelations too, of information or ideas that just come out of nowhere and have a huge impact in the coming years and decades, but seem to come out of nowhere. The suddenness and the slowness is a paradox that I'm still wrapping my head around. And so I keep repeating that to help understand it.
That's great. And you know what it made me think of when you were talking about that is the sextile to Uranus, right?
hmm
Which, if we
hmm
look at this on the New York Stock Exchange chart, is exactly conjunct, well, not to the exact minute, but real close, just within about 15 minutes or less, right? We have Uranus sitting on the New York Stock Exchange sun. So when you think
Wow.
about, slow and then all at once, that Uranus is kind of like popped into my mind is like that, because that's how Uranus moves, right? It moves in quanta. So it's like it kind of plods along and then all of a sudden it's like poof, it's somewhere else,
Yep.
And so that's definitely really poignant. There was one other thing I was going to point out about this the situation that we have going on with the Saturn Neptune moon, or just the Saturn Neptune conjunction in general. Um, I look at quite a few of these little they're called minor planets or asteroids. I use a technique that I learned from Sandy. She has a Substack that'll be a link in the video description below. And she has found that you can use these minor planets or asteroids that have the name of whatever the thing is that you're representing, right? For example, this is minor planet or asteroid Robot. And I went, man, when she first told me this technique, I spent hours down this rabbit hole.
It's a rabbit hole.
It's
Yeah.
such a rabbit hole. And I found it to be fantastically aligned most of the time. Not every one works, but when you find a good one, boy, it's so good. And I'm going to actually make a video with her about this soon, about the robotics set. But this minor planet Robot is prominently placed at every major robotics event ever. And what's really standing out to me right now is that the Saturn, Neptune, and Moon on the 19th conjunction is in sextile to minor planet Robot, almost within a 2-degree orb. And so I think robotics is certainly has been making headlines as of late. I think we're going to just see that exponentially increase as well. So
Yeah, and that's a big application of AI. That's another way in which we could see this being a long-term shift for humanity. I mean, if we get anthropomorphic robots that impact, that are usable domestically at work, that's the next era of human evolution. I think that's the way we'll practically see it. And I love that. I love that point. The minor planets are so fascinating to look at. I also wanted to point back, not to go back, but just the Uranus in Taurus is money at the end of the day. And we're changing money. And for it to be right on the New York Stock Exchange sun, I just think we're going to look back and see this is where money as a concept, currencies especially, are forever changed. And it might take years, but we'll go there, and
It might take years and
um,
it might not, you know?
it might not.
And
Right,
I
right.
mean, there's been so much talk about digital currencies for so long. You know, last year we got that Genius bill, and now there's the Clarity bill too, just in the realm of crypto, but not so much crypto. I mean, it is crypto, but stable coins, right? And and that is just looming on the horizon. They say due to pass any time, but that could really launch us into kind of the next phase of transforming our currency through digits, through stable
Hmm.
coins. And that's a whole nother conversation, but just things to think about in the realm of how this could play out, you know?
And just to show once again, I think to wrap this up, the idea that this impacts so many sectors is not only specifically provable with the robots MP, with the Uranus part, but the fact that it's at 0 degrees Aries is not just a metaphor, a global point, the start of the zodiac, but we can see how it is impacting all these different sectors. And, I think also Taurus, I think of Earth and nature and the way that we might be going through a massive change in the history of nature and climate. And that was a big part of the last time it happened in the Neolithic era. So, I'm excited to see how this unfolds, but I think it's important to be patient and to accept that it might take time because it's going to be both busy and a lot of information at once. So you want to make sure you have time and space to digest it all.
Yeah, I totally agree. And you know, the last thing before we wrap up that I didn't really talk much about, but I did want to point out is that the Saturn Neptune conjunction is forming a major trine to the part of fortune in Leo. And so the part of fortune, you know, I talk a lot about it in all of my financial astrology videos, is it's a very powerful point in financial astrology. It also can represent quite literally where your fortune comes from. It can also just represent your own like inner wellspring of joy, right?
Hmm.
And so the fact that this conjunction is trying to the part of fortune in the second house over New York City, I mean, we can't underrate this, right? The conjunctions in the 10th house, which is public perception and how people see you, right? And then the second house is literally your stores of wealth and your relationship to wealth. And we have the part of fortune there. So I think it does this, I guess, to wrap it up on a really positive note, not to be overly positive, because I'm sure there will be plenty of trials and
War, yay.
I'm sure there are plenty of trials and tribulations and challenges on the horizon. This is not all like rainbows and unicorns, you know? Um, but but this setup speaks to the possibility of resilience and adaptation. And
Hmm.
I really value that. And this chart is very unique compared to prior Saturn Neptune conjunction charts. So I think that's a great note to leave it off on.
Yeah, and I love the trine to Leo. Thanks for ending on that note because Leo and Aries are both about courage, bravery, and Aries more the vision and Leo the more heart-centric courage. And I think it's really important not to be blindly optimistic, but there's so much doom and gloom. And I see so many astrologers talking about war and Uranus repeating, and there's some really scary cycles repeating. I'm not trying to ignore that, but I think we need to see that there are unique optimistic aspects of this. And I love that you found that trine because it's not just hoping for the best, it's in the math. The math shows that there's good possibility in the future. And my biggest hope is that we have some fast change to get through this huge reset, this huge restructuring faster than normal. And if we look back to prior conjunctions, we didn't have that. We didn't have that in 89. We didn't have that in 53. In the 40s, Uranus was squaring Pluto, and that was really uncomfortable during World War II. Now they're trining each other, which is, I keep calling it the astrology of hope because I think it gives me hope for the future. And I love that you're on the same page with me there. It makes me
Yeah,
happy.
I think it's super important that we're aware of all of the potential possibilities or challenges that may arise in any given cycle, but that we keep our intention set on what we want to manifest for ourselves in our own lives and in the world. And this definitely gives me some constructive support for that. So, um, Awesome. This has been I love our conversations. Thank you
Me
so much for
too.
joining me again. And do you want to tell everybody how they can find you?
Yes, you can find me on Patreon or Substack at the Weekly Stars. I have a really fun weekly conversation, monthly calendar updates. I tend to approach things more from a mundane and personal perspective. It's a nice different balance than just the financial work, but I think together you and I cover so many bases. It's so fun.
Yeah, it's incredibly complimentary. I really love it. So you can find me either at my Patreon or through my Discord, and there's going to be links in the video description below. I also do individualized readings. I do financial astrology. I also do regular astrology readings as well. I study all kinds of things. So feel free to check out my website, margotamala.com. And don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button, and we'll talk to you next time.
Bye. Thanks, Margot.
Bye.